Marcy Kaptur, who has spent 33 years in Congress, is among those who have pushed for more lethal aid for Ukraine. As far back as last July, Kaptur was among a bipartisan group of Congress members who introduced legislation authorizing the U.S. to provide up to $100 million in military aid to Ukraine. But speaking to Natalka Pisnia of Ukrainian broadcaster TSN this week, she seemed to be keeping to the party line.
Marcy, which weapon against Russian aggression is most effective, in your opinion?
The most effective weapon against Russian aggression is the unity of the free world. That includes all of Europe and the United States and our allies in other places like Australia and New Zealand. Freedom-loving nations everywhere have to stand at Ukraine's side now. That unity is very important. We see what Russia is doing, even with some of its closest neighbors, embarking upon broadcasts now in the language of countries adjacent to it, with the propaganda just spilling out across Europe. I think it's very clear what President Putin is about. It's not new, sadly, for expansionist Russia, but it's very dangerous. And so I think that the United Nations has a role to play. I think NATO has an important role to play. I think nations across our world, wherever they might exist, have a responsibility to stand at Ukraine's side as a free and sovereign nation.
Kaptur is known to be a close confidant of President Obama. Could she provide any insight into his thinking on the decision to hold back weapons from Ukraine?
The president was making a decision based on information he had as to Russia's intentions, and I think is legitimately concerned about the fate of the Ukrainian people, including those willing to fight for Ukraine. I can't really speak for him, but I think that it's important that Ukraine demonstrate that it is doing everything that it can to assure that its military units are absent infiltration by the Russian government.
But how much longer can Ukraine wait? A peace deal agreed to in February between Ukraine and Russia has failed to hold. Both Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed militants accuse each other of violations of a ceasefire. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation grows ever more precarious and more casualties are daily reported.
I think time is growing very short. And I think that this morning I've signed another letter with all of my colleagues on the Defense Appropriations Committee to the President, asking him to advance the schedule, whatever schedule he has in his mind, to act with dispatch now.
In Europe, unity over sanctions on Moscow over its destabilization of Ukraine has been severely tested in recent months. If America were to provide weapons, the strain would no doubt spread to transatlantic partnerships too, not least because of the position of Berlin, where German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ruled out a military solution to the conflict in East Ukraine. But Marcy Kaptur says the U.S. must live up to its historical obligations.
Well, I think it's always important to negotiate and try to keep the terms of, to hold nations accountable for the agreements that they've signed. I have a problem in that regard with the Budapest Memorandum that was signed in 1993. Ukraine gave up her nuclear weapons and received a promise. I view it as a promise, others disagree with that language, that her territorial integrity would be protected. And the United States was one of the signatories to that agreement. I, as one political official in the United States, feel we have an obligation because we were a signatory to that agreement.